I was trying to start with a off the record Anchorman quote just to get everybody in the right headspace.
I'm ready now.
Yes, you are. Codie Sanchez, future billionaire. Welcome to this recorded conversation.
From your mouth to God's ears. That's all we have to say.
I don't know if you called yourself a future billionaire or if somebody else did that for you, or if that was like the title of a post you recorded or anything like that. But it definitely stuck in my head.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I think that was one. I think I was making a joke about inflation and monetary policy, which is probably only funny to me. But that would be the only circumstance in which I would call myself a future billionaire, I think.
I took that like very literally. I felt like that was so on brand and clear. And I was like, that's actually like a good description of her writing and her approach. And I genuinely was like, is that actually like your goal? Is that how you think of your job, as just like wake up every day and be like, how do I billionaire today?
I'm going to start writing that on my whiteboard. That is not typically my goal, no. But when I think about it, I mean, we talk about this a lot. I truly do believe that money is just a tool. So
Yeah.
if I think about it that way, then the more tools I have, the more ability I have to construct the world that I want, right? And the world that I think is best for all and for me and for the people that are around me. And so I like that idea of pushing for billionaire status, not for the money. Like I don't need a jet and a bunch of fancy cars or anything like that. But I do like it for the idea of increasingly today, I think it goes to show that the elites have massive power to change and sway the world in the positions that they'd like to. And so I think we should all be striving for better balance sheets because then we have more say in the world around us.
Yeah. I mean, I think the true like approach to achieving something in politics is probably to like achieve something capitalist first and then go into politics with a much bigger bankroll.
Well, there was this incredible book actually called The Wise Men. I don't know if you've read it, but it's about the six men who sort of behind the scenes shaped policy post World War One and World War Two. And they were based in the US. But essentially, what was interesting is they were these sort of private public statesmen. They were not in the public eye. They were not trying to run for public office. And yet they arguably saved us from the Cold War and created what would be considered now foreign policy of sort of capitalistic movement throughout the world. And what I found interesting about it is back then it was considered a good thing for you to have a conflict of interest in business, right? And there was a saying that was something like no conflicts, not interesting. Like if you had no conflicts whatsoever, you probably hadn't done anything very interesting that should allow you to be in a position of power. Because in fact, you haven't built anything yet. And so if you're not a builder, then all you're going to do is build your wealth from the political podium. And so I thought that was
uh,
really interesting.
that is really cool. I mean, that probably came from the same era as the like judge someone by the quality of their enemies
Yeah.
thing. That feels like the same thread.
Yeah, I think it's right. And I think that might be, I mean, term limits, that, but I think that might be one of the main reasons why we have so many problems in politics today is that you have these people who continue to stay forever and they make their entire endeavor becoming a politician, as opposed to these gentlemen kind of came in and out of the public-private sphere. And, you could say today people would say, well, they were trying to better their business from that standpoint. But I think in fact it was kind of the opposite. It was like now it's time to not focus on making money and we go help the country for a bit and then we can go back.
Yeah, I think that was the way it was intended. That was like Benjamin Franklin's story, right? It was like an entrepreneur and then an inventor and then kind of a diplomat in his later years. Um, but this is both the limit of my knowledge of politics and I've hit my political conversation quota for the day. So we should we should get to the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but I think your background is super interesting because it seems like I don't know, you had a lot of adventures on your way to becoming the like digital and online and offline mogul aspirant, mogul rising that you are today, and tripped across some like kind of both incredible institutions and incredible life experiences that I think are like totally worth it as background. And because I don't know, there's just like a lot of street cred to being a I don't know, do you consider yourself your whole journalist chapter like I don't want to throw around conflict journalist, but like embedded journalist is fair to say, like in journalist with skin in the fucking game for sure.
Yeah, I think that was definitely part of it. I mean, yeah, I was embedded, you could say, except we weren't with terrorists per se. I mean, it was with the cartel. But yeah, at the time, I mean, I was living along the U.S. Mexico border. I remember we would stay at these little like sort of like subsidized housing basically from Americans for people down in Mexico. And the only heating mechanism was the gas stove, which is a really dangerous idea. Actually, you should never heat your house with a gas stove, myriad of reasons. But yeah, so at the time, we were writing stories about people disappearing who looked a lot like me, long haired, young female along the US Mexico border called Las Desaparecidas, the disappeared women. And anyway, so at the time, yeah, I wrote a lot about stories for people that weren't being told. And I think that eventually led me to money because, like we were talking about in the beginning, the only difference really between Codie Sanchez and Maria Sanchez or Condesa Sanchez is basically that I had different dollars behind me just as an American in sort of a middle class family. And so, yeah, but definitely saw things that I think maybe today more people should try to see because you really understand what discrepancy is when you see bodies hanging from underpasses and extreme violence right in front of your eyes.
Yeah, that would change your worldview and give you some context and some appreciation for all of the things that we have. And yeah, I mean, is there anything else that it was definitely, it sounded like a change of direction for you in your life aside, you changed from journalist to kind of finance, but are there other like big life lessons you carried from that chapter of life, or were you pretty quickly like, fuck this is not how I want to
No, I
spend
mean,
my
in the
life?
beginning, it's fascinating and fast paced, right? I think that's one of the reasons why we even do what we do today as sort of like modern day journalists in a different
Yeah.
spectrum, which is the endorphin hits are real, right? So when you're down there and you're writing these stories and the adrenaline happens as we're like, sort of shadowing different cartel leaders. I can remember one time, crossing the border and the border, if you, maybe people have seen it now, but the border along, this was in Texas along El Paso and Juarez. There's not really a border. It's like slapstick stuff all thrown together and like tons of holes and like ATVs going back and through it. It's mayhem. At least it was back then. This was like 10 years ago. And I remember we were driving along this like potted road like this and trying to see, we wanted to get a picture of the end of the border wall and like write a piece about like what that meant in the context. And as we're going, so we're on the US side and on the Mexican side right through, imagine like, wall hole, wall hole, wall hole, right? So it's sort of like this flickering film as we're driving by and we notice that there's people tracking us that are trailing right alongside. And then we see some guns and then we kind of notice like, oh, maybe these are not police. So what are we going to do? And there's not really a good turnaround spot. And so we finally get to a turnaround spot, but see them come through the wall. So we're like, oh my gosh, it's over. Like I'm too young, mom. But in that moment, I remember the thing that I stuck with me, through to today is basically that, I was so amazed when you saw the Border Patrol agents at the time. Like these people were in this like giant truck, kind of like all kitted out, very expensive. There were a ton of guys. They had a ton of sort of, weapons and different things in there. And they were out, like the Border Patrol had these like cute little trucks. I mean, it was so different, the discrepancy between the two. And
Wow.
again, it got me back to think about money. What's the difference between these guys and this guys? And why are these guys funded and these guys aren't? And not from a political spectrum, because back in the day, then that wasn't very political. Nobody was really talking about the border like 10 years ago like they are today.
Yeah.
But that's when I realized, man, like there are these big issues in the world, and I had better, if I want to make a stand in them, I better figure out how to get the tools in my hands to do it. And so I think the biggest lesson there was, he who has the bigger stick usually wins.
Yeah. And so you shifted your focus to stick growing and building.
Yeah. Yeah.
How long?
Well, actually, I think what happened was I had like a quarter life crisis. I don't know if anybody can relate. Actually, I think a lot of like Gen Z and millennials have had quarter life crises, right? It was like work really hard, go to school, do all this stuff that you're supposed to do, and then you start achieving some of it. And you're like, I'm miserable. I'm not making enough money. I'm in student debt. What am I going to do next? So I had my little quarter life crisis before I was planning on going to law school. And I was like, wait a second, like, I don't want to be a journalist because I don't want to keep getting jaded and having the endorphin rush of rushing into these sort of situations just because they spike some cortisol in me. But simultaneously, I don't want to go to law and argue with people all day. Like, that doesn't sound that great to me. And so at my
Are you
quarterly,
like a thrill seeker? Is that like
uh,
what kind of led you to that type of journalism in the first place?
maybe. I mean, I was an athlete for a long time. I
Okay.
think I'm just in pursuit of curiosity. Like, where can you find the big answers to the big questions? Um, and and I think a lot of us these days, like, that's why the internet's so fascinating. You can just go down these rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Um, but what I realized at that time was I sat down with my law professor, one of my favorite law professors, and he basically said to me, what is the only language that everybody speaks? And his tone was, and his comment was, well, it's green. That was his hint to me. And so I thought that was funny coming from a law professor,
Yeah.
but that's when I realized I don't know anything about money. I don't even know what I could think I called a 401k a 401k at the time. Like, that's how little I knew. Um, and so then I figured I got to find this out. And I wasn't focused on building at that time. I was focused on learning because I didn't even know what to build or how to build anything yet.
So I mean, I think that's a good, it is a great epiphany, and it's a good epiphany to have at the age that you had it rather than at 55. When you're like, oh, I've spent my whole career and realize I'm not where I want to be, and I was focused on the wrong thing. So what do you do when you realize, that your focus to date has been not on the place that you want it to be, and you feel like you're starting from zero, and you're like, I want to enter this world, because I think a lot of people end up in this spot, and whether it's finance that they're trying to learn or something else, starting from zero is fucking scary. But a lot of people, I think the fullest lives that you see, people tend to start from zero, like sometimes multiple times. So how did you think about that?
Yeah, I think plans are normally for fairy tales. Like, I don't think that there's very many people that I met, including Jeff Bezos, who are like, yeah, naturally, bookstore into $1 billion empire that's going to control the world. Like, I know where this is going. Nobody knows where it's going. The truth of the matter is, I truly believe that if people can follow their curiosity, they're going to end up exactly where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And that anything else that's trying to tell you a systematic, programmatic way to figure out what to do with your life is total bullshit. Because in fact, you are the only person that knows. And the only reason I think self-help and all that other stuff is useful is because you're just trying, we've done so many things to our gut or intuition, whatever you want to call it, that confuses it, right? It's like, you have to go to school, you have to do this. We've been told all these things. But in reality, the only thing you should be trying to focus on is knowing thyself, like the Oracle at Delphi said. Know thyself. What is interesting to you? What could you get lost in? What little rabbit hole do you want to go down? And this is where then people are like, oh gosh, I don't know. I'm freaked out. It's like, it's in this moment, in this very moment right now. What are you really interested in? And not lost in from an entertainment standpoint. I'm not talking about watching TikToks. Everybody falls down those. But at the end of
Subtle
listening
plug
to
for
them,
your own amazing TikTok channel.
yeah,
Go check it out.
yeah, you'll learn something on there though. Um,
Yeah.
but TikToks, or you don't feel good after you
Yeah.
consume a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
of social. Like, that. But what's the thing that you go down a rabbit hole on and you feel good at the end? And that, I think, is where the truth lies. Just follow the thing that you would do even if nobody paid you.
Yeah. That's I have to like put money in a jar every time I quote Naval, but that is a good, like, that is his reading recommendations. Like, read whatever thing is most interesting you at the time. And I think the reason for that is probably like whatever you're most interested in, you'll move the fastest towards. And like it's really more about pace, in a lot of contexts than anything else. I think it's maybe especially when you're younger, when you're in like that explore mode, like just consume as much potentially helpful stuff. Um, okay, so
Yeah.
so what
I
did that
think
look
it's
like?
pace and stamina, because I think it's speed, but it's also continuation. Like, you're just
Yeah,
not going to keep going if all you can eat is kale and you don't like kale. But
yeah,
if you consume something that you actually like and you can get on a green juice cleanse for like a week, maybe that works.
yeah. So what did that look like for you when you were approaching finance? You were curious. I mean, where do you start? You go to the bookstore, you go to Google, you start with friends. Like, what was your process?
Yeah, I think there's three pillars. I mean, for me, the first pillar, because I'm a writer, is that I can't really think clearly when I speak. I can share things, but I don't think that way. I have to write stuff down. And I think humans are either spoken word people, like they need to have a conversation about it, written word people, or they have to listen to somebody else about it. And so you're sort of one of the three.
Okay.
And so I was a writer. So I always would just have a journal. I have one in front of me right now. And I'd be writing down like, what happened today? What was interesting? Where do I want to learn more of? Every single day, just kind of like letting the curiosity flow. And that was probably the first thing. And then, from there, I think the next stage that was really important to me was I kind of started cutting out early. I don't have a very good attention span. I think that's actually a blessing in disguise. And especially in conversations with humans. Like I burned through humans pretty quickly. Like if they were talking about something that wasn't interesting, we weren't going to be buds for long. And so that was the next thing. I just kept finding, where are the interesting humans? Where are they? Where are you guys? And as a journalist, that's all you do. Write things out, find interesting people, ask them questions. Write things out, find interesting people, ask them questions. Honestly, if more people did that, I think it's why people do podcasts. If more people did that, you would be amazed at the 10x that would happen in your life, because you'd be hearing interesting ideas all the time. You would be naturally following people that you found more intriguing, and you would be learning more about yourself at the same time through other people's stories. And so that's what I did.
Yeah, and so you just kind of changed the focus of your effort from journalist assignments to your own curiosity. And actually, when you put it like that, that sounds a lot like what I do most days, which I do
Yeah.
not think of myself as a journalist like at all. But yeah, it is
Yeah.
interesting to like see those things kind of come together. So you ended up working in finance too, right? Like that was part of the plunge.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm a curator of conversations, and you are too. And most of the people that I know that have interesting lives are the same. They curate humans, they curate conversations, and they're pretty intense about both of those things. It's the difference, I think, between, going and swiping like this to meet people on the internet and like actively going out and trying to meet people in real life and know about them and understand them. Active versus passive curation. And so, yeah, so I worked at finance right after I was a journalist, but the way I got into the finance realm was very similar. I went to a conference that I thought looked
Mm,
interesting, and I tried to find my niche. And I talked with as many people as I could. I found most of it uninteresting, and then I met one lady who kind of branded, bridged for me. How could I, as a journalist who doesn't really love Excel spreadsheets, find something interesting in finance?
that's
And we had a
awesome.
conversation that led to a new move.
That's super cool. I like a conference as a like I don't know, just how do you get meet the most people and get the most information in like 1 week? You got to be going to a conference of an industry you don't know much about. So what was how did she plug you into that world?
So this was a Latinos in Finance conference, and we
Okay.
sat around a table, and I just, randomly happened to sit next to her. And of the 10 women at the table or whatever, I started having conversations with most of them. Nothing really clicked. And then with her, when I started asking her what she did, she talked about an accelerated development program. So to your point on, pace versus stamina, in this instance, she was like, an accelerated development program is basically where you go to a company and you see a bunch of different segments of the company. And at the
Mm,
end of it, you pick one of the areas that you want to work in if that business unit picks you too. I was like, well, that'd be great because I could basically understand this industry in 12 months that I don't understand now at all,
yeah.
and have speed to get into it in a way that seemed useful for me. And so that conversation basically led to me getting an interview. And I certainly wasn't smart on anything in finance. I wasn't particularly skilled. The only skill set was the ability to ask questions, listen, and then pivot. And so, I think taking debate really young helped with that. And that would be something I
Mm,
would love all of my kids to do eventually.
yeah. Yeah. Debate is seems to be a common thread of some of the the best critical thinkers that I've met. I've worked with a number of people who were like former debate champions. And you don't really know how dumb you are until you try to persuade somebody who's really good at debate of something that you think you believe, but you don't actually have all the evidence for. And you just like leave that conversation like doubting yourself in ways that you did not anticipate.
Yes, it's so true. I mean, they talk about the power of the pen, but I do think the power of the question is probably just as high up there, because you don't even have to tell somebody something. All you have to do is ask the right questions to get them to your standpoint. It's the difference between saying, well, I love, I love, I won't use a political example, but like when somebody's disagreeing with you about something, so anything in the world, one of my favorite tools for deflection is basically the question. So if it's like, Codie, I don't think that I don't think you should invest in small businesses. I think you should invest in crypto instead, right? Let's say that that's something that people said on the internet and didn't get mad at me about all the time.
Just a hypothetical, not not an open wound at all.
But so let's say somebody was going to say something like that to you. Most people, what they do is react directionally to them. That's dumb. I don't like small businesses. I like crypto. And you're letting them frame the question if you respond back exactly to that statement. Or instead, I would ask questions about it, such as, talk to me about what percentage of your net worth is in crypto. So the percentage is usually relatively low. And then so I'd say, okay, so if actions speak louder than words, then what are your actions saying, right? Or, you would try to get them to answer a question that's going to give you the answer that you want. And that I think is one of the biggest tools in debate. And it's called putting them in a corner.
You really would have been a great lawyer, though, if you went into that. Maybe. And you say you can only think when you write. It sounds like somebody who can think and talk on the fly to me. But so at the end of that rotation program, I have some friends who've done those. I think they're really cool, kind of like pathways in, and people like really underestimate how much training like big companies will give you. Like I've got a friend right now who's like basically doing a 6-month master's degree and getting paid to learn all the stuff that he needs to do the job for the next 2 years. So at the end of your program, like what spoke to you? Where did you jump in?
That's such a good point, actually. I think so I had my MBA when I went to Georgetown, which was really expensive, paid for by Goldman Sachs and State Street, two of the companies I worked for at the time. I was working, full time while I went to school for an executive MBA. The Georgetown MBA, they flew me all around the world to do it, and it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars that I didn't have to pay for. And then the part that people don't realize is like the play that I did there is I was at State Street originally when I started doing my MBA. And they agreed to pay for it, but they're a big corporation, so they're smart. And they say, if we pay for this, you have a 3-year contract with us. You're going to have to stay. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, sure, no problem. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to commit to that while I'm in an organization. And I said, well, what you do is you negotiate into your next company the buyout of that contract, just like an athlete or anything would, right? So you basically say, hey, so when I got recruited to Georgetown, I said, I didn't tell them till the very end. I got really we got what I would call pregnant with each other, really far down the field. And then I said, hey, by the way, the salary's great. I'm not even going to negotiate with you on that, but I do have a buyout that I have to have happen on my contract for my MBA program. And they were like, what? Like, this is the first we've heard of it. But by then I had basically accepted the offer and said, oh, by the way, we got to add this tiny little, $150,000, no big item to it.
One-time cost, no problem at all. Don't sweat it.
Yeah.
You're Goldman Sachs. You're good for it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I knew by the end of the I'd want to stay at Goldman for about 2 years. And that was the contract that I agreed to sign. So to your point, and Vanguard, spends, so they say, we said we were going to talk about this originally. So at some point we will, but my husband's a Navy SEAL. They say that they spend anywhere from like $1 million a year to $10 million over the course of a lifetime in training in Navy SEALs. They're like really, really expensive to train, right? And I bet if you looked at the average cost for like execs or high performers within like Fortune 500 companies, they're probably spending a couple $100,000 a year to train their people. And so I think you're right. There's so many people these days saying, fuck the man. I don't want to go to any big corporations. But actually, when you first start out, they're wildly helpful, because what's the training when you go to a startup? It's like, do a bunch of stuff and stop talking to me, right? Like that's the training.
That is pretty much word for word the training that I got. And yeah, it is a very different, like, I don't know. I'm not good at following directions. So like that kind of worked for me. Like I'd rather somebody just leave me alone. But there are definitely days when I was like, fucking, why won't someone just teach me how to do this? And I'm like, yeah, it would have been great to like go through a rotation program or have 6 months of boot camp of training when you show up. And that's interesting. I haven't thought about the like cost of training or cost of creating, an engineer or a analyst or something like that. But I bet that is, an interesting number to look at.
Mhm.
Especially, I mean, I guess like Lambda School and stuff, like the boot camps probably have a pretty good handle on that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
also think about it this way. So if we've now determined that IQ is not the major predictor for success from a monetary standpoint, which all the data seems to show us, we've seen that what EQ is,
Mhm.
that if you have a higher EQ level, you actually have a monetarily, statistically significant, so it's real likelihood that you're going to be more successful than somebody else who has a lower EQ. And so if you think about it, when you go to a corporation, that's really the largest thing that they're teaching you is how to politic, how to ask questions appropriately, and they're rounding your edges. I had a lot of edges when I went in. I didn't know what like a binder was that you put your resume in and showed up with.
Yeah.
Like I had never worn pantyhose in my life. And when I started out, I had to wear like pantyhose in finance. Like all these rounding of edges. And I can almost always tell with the hundreds of companies we've invested in which entrepreneurs have been through a big corporate training and which ones haven't, which ones have been at big corporations or not. And I would hazard a guess that their ability to get capital is about 2x easier than those who have never been to either a top tier Ivy League school or a big corporation, because you just learn the right things to say to people who have money.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, it feels like Silicon Valley is such a like bizarro world, like inverse of that almost.
Mhm.
But it's also so tiny, like it's a rounding error to Goldman Sachs, like the entire VC industry. So yeah, that is a,
But
I don't
even
know.
even Silicon Valley is full of dropouts from higher
Hmm.
from Ivy League schools who are often fed by feeder really high level high schools
Oh yeah.
who also usually have somebody who's been a consultant at some point. I mean, a bunch of the tech companies that I've invested in, they're full of Bain and Deloitte and one hit year wonders. But 1 year is kind of all you need at one of those big institutions to be able to talk the talk to multi-millionaires.
Yeah, I find some much smarter friends who are on that path, who are like, they graduate with like an Ivy League MBA, and they're like, all right, I'm going to go get a job in PE. And the PE firm is like, yeah, I know that you have an MBA from Wharton, but you don't actually know shit until you go work in investment banking for 2 years. So like, why don't you go do that? And then I'll believe that you actually know what's going on. It's so funny that like investment banking is actually like the business school to get into some of these like PE and
Oh yeah,
top tier consultants.
that's definitely true these days.
Yeah. So and I'm glad you mentioned Vanguard, because that I don't know. I just have like deep respect for Jack Bogle, and I feel like that's an institution that I deeply love. But I've always been curious, like what it's like on the inside. Is it a tangible difference from working somewhere like Goldman or State Street or whatever? And what was your day to day there?
Yeah. Well, I really didn't like working at Vanguard. And I think I've
Really?
said
Okay.
that publicly or maybe not. Vanguard is amazing for mediocrity.
Hmm.
So, if you think about Vanguard, it is the opposite of a meritocracy. Everybody there, it's very hard to get fired from Vanguard. I mean,
Hmm.
all they do, if you haven't been a good performer there, you'll just move around to departments a lot, or you'll never progress and you'll stay in the position. But in my view, Vanguard is like hyper socialistic almost. So
Hmm.
everything is by committee, everything is hyper bureaucratic, and they don't pay compensation wise based on your merit. If you bring in more money, you don't always make more money. It's very confusing. I mean, for example, so salespeople at that firm, for instance, typically, how do you make money if you're a salesperson? You sell more shit,
Yep.
right? Like that's typically how it goes. Here, it's by the number of meetings that you do.
Oh,
So like
interesting.
your activity level. So like I'm super busy, you're super busy, but I'm busier than you are, but you bring in more money than I do. Oh, you should make more money. That makes no sense to me. But this is the way that this organization thinks. And they've thought like that for years. And then they also, so I have a ton of respect for, first of all, the way some of the people who created that company are brilliant, because the way they structured it, they've actually put a patent on it. They love to pretend like they're not capitalistic, but they are, because they created a structure that was so brilliant. It basically is a mutual insurance company. So it's like that basically means it's owned by their shareholders, right? So like if you own insurance at Mutual of Omaha, you own part of the company, right?
Yeah.
So that's the same thing that Vanguard is, but they're not an insurance company. So they are sort of investor owned in that way, but then they patented that ability to be investor owned so no other firm could do it. So it's like, no, we care about humans and our people, but only if we can only do it and nobody else can do it, right? Which is fascinating. And then on tandem with that, they where they are really good, I think, is for people who don't want to highly outperform. Like if you
Mhm.
want to be somewhere, you want to do pretty good for the rest of your life, and you want to like kind of keep growing marginally, like nice little 5-10% a year, they're great. They won't fire you. They have good healthcare. There are good benefits to it. But like if you decide that you want to come in and drive a BMW, like prepare to get shamed mercilessly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the culture of like low fees, frugal, like indexers, which is exactly like what I want when I go there as a consumer of, my
As a
401k
consumer.
was whatever. It's
Yeah.
like, I just want steady Eddie, low fees, like don't fuck anything up, don't sell me anything I don't need. Which as a consumer is like what you get at Vanguard, but really interesting to hear like I don't know, the employer brand. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a fit for somebody looking for some serotonin and cortisol and other brain juice.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I still have friends that work there, and I have friends that have worked there forever, and a lot of them really, really like it.
Yeah,
I just don't. It's hyper bureaucratic.
yeah,
And not that, I mean, Goldman was very bureaucratic, but meritocracy based. Like it was like eat what you kill, do well, bottom 10 to 20% gets cut every year, but you know where you stand.
hmm
And the difference with Vanguard is, I think in this day and age, it'll be interesting to see what survives. But doing tasks for the ability to do tasks continuously, I think is like probably what sucks people's soul faster than anything else. And it's why people make movies like Office Space. It's like the 1042 or whatever that stupid document is that they talk
yeah,
about.
yeah.
And
TPS
so
reports. Yeah,
the CPI,
yeah.
exactly. So that is what reminds me of that place. Now, maybe it's gotten better and it's different, but that's what it was like at the time. But
Yeah.
that said, amazing training. So don't
Mm.
tell them I told you, but go there for like 6 months or a year, take all their training, and then bail and start your own asset management firm.
Okay, I like it, but yeah, okay. Um, so your transition, and I think this is where I want to spend like the meat of the conversation here. It's at least where I have the most questions. Is your like post finance, personal finance career here, right? So like, and I've heard, I don't know, like, how would you describe like your day to day now or your job? Because this is a thing that like I struggle with too, and I'm always curious with like a blank sheet how people think about it, and not just like whatever how you introduce yourself at a party, but truly like how you internally think about it.
Yeah. Well, when I think about what I do, I usually always say I'm an investor first. Like I make the most money from what I've invested in and the businesses that I invest in and own ownership shares. And I like that because it's diversified. I don't have just
Mhm.
one thing that can kill me. I'd have to shoot a lot of babies.
Why do they have to
And
be babies?
because they're my babies, they're my business
Oh,
babies.
okay, all right.
And so yeah, so that, but when it comes to the stuff that I'm having the most fun with and what I spend the most time on is probably the media companies now, like doing things
Mm,
like this. So when it comes to day structuring, I've tried to sort of mm, the stuff that I've done really well at being an investor, I try to then really create SOPs and processes so somebody else can do it. And one of the biggest mistakes I made early on is when I got bored with something, because remember I told you I had a short attention span, I would just leave and go do the next thing. And when I get bored with something, it's usually where it's most profitable. And that's the same with most humans. We're like
yeah.
ready for the next career, but probably if we stayed in that same career, we could leapfrog faster. And so now what I've done instead is since I own the company, then I can put an operator in and backfill myself. And like right now, I have one company that I got to get myself out of the finances of, but I still own 40% of the business. I'm hiring somebody else to do all the oversight on that business. So I try to do that with all my investment companies. And then most of my day is now spent, thinking, writing, and obsessing about how do we build content and media companies that can have reach in today's age, because I think that's the next form of leverage, like we've talked about. I can understand capital now. Now I want to understand content and audience.
Okay, cool. So I think this is a good structure. I heard you say, I think on some other podcasts, that most millionaires have 7 to 12 income streams. And I completely believe you. I don't know where that stat came from, but it sounds right to me. Is that like your work is to build up those income streams? Is that like where you're at now? How do you classify those? And I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of details to dig into because there's a lot of people who talk about that as a goal or a concept, but I feel like you are closer to this than most people I know. And I'm really interested to dig into the details of like how you actually run that.
Yeah, I think it's like the single most important thing you can do. If people are on here and they're crypto people, it's a decentralization of your finances as opposed to a centralization of your finances. So you wouldn't like Bitcoin very much if it had one centralized node that anybody could take down, right? Which is most people's salary or most entrepreneurs' revenue stream from their one business that's not isolated. So what I like to think about is a decentralized node with sort of, you can have in the beginning one centralized main income stream, which is where I started and most people started. But
Mhm.
your mission in life should be inability for anybody to take you down with one bullet. And so today, what that looks like for me is, I have interest in something like 45 not all businesses, not all of them cash flow, but I definitely have, upwards of 20, 25, 30 revenue streams. And, those revenue streams continue to grow. So there's like multiple ways to do it, but let's start with like one way I like to think about adding additional revenue streams. There's like the easy way. So the easy way to add your first like there's almost no excuse for anybody listening to this to not have at least two revenue streams. Your first revenue stream can be your employment or your salary, and your second revenue stream can be something really little, like a Fundrise account where you invest in real estate in like small chunks and you get dividends paid to you. And then it could be Wealthfront with a dividend paying stock portfolio, right? So the first way that you want to do it is just like the easiest way with the least amount of time with these new services that allow you to invest in hard assets that continue to cash flow while you're sleeping. So you
Mhm.
start there, right? And you can do the same thing with crypto staking or mining. You can do the same thing with earning on various types of cryptos. If you do Gemini or Kraken or whatever you want, right? But that should just be one portion of it. So right there, if you had your employment, and then you had real estate Fundrise, and then you had Wealthfront dividend paying stocks, and then you had Kraken or Gemini cash flowing on crypto. We've got four. Now you have four revenue streams. The tough part about those four is, or at least three of those four, you got to have money, right? For those other three to become meaningful. And so you start now, but you have to have pretty decent amount of cash to make enough to cover your expenses. And so then the next thing I think people should focus on doing is where can I get the highest ROI, the highest cash flow to me with the lowest amount of money and time? And you basically are just looking at it like a teeter-totter, right? So like high ROI, low time and investment.
Mhm.
And the more you can think about any opportunity that you're putting in front of yourself until you get to financial freedom, which it at least means to me that you cover your expenses with things that don't require your time. I think people should be optimizing for that. And so the first ways that I started doing that were, let's say the very first thing I started doing to do that. Well, I think I started with a startup that failed and realized that was not a good way to make money by spending it first.
Yeah,
Um,
it's almost the opposite of like the cash flow no time. It's the it is they like deposit time, deposit time, deposit time, like maybe life-changing mother load at the end.
exactly. But that's how most people think about cash flowing. They think a startup or a side hustle.
Mhm.
And I actually think that's wrong. You should usually be looking at assets. How can something else work for me? And so after I messed up on that first one, I basically started going around to people, maybe like you and I are today, but saying like, where was your first income stream? Like, how did you
Mhm.
do this next? How could I learn from you and put a little of money in or some time in and get in on your next deal that cash flows? And so that's what I started to do until finally now today. I mean, this too, you can have, so on our media companies, we probably have 7 to 10 revenue streams on each one of them. And then I have 5 or 6 media companies that I own now. Those are all revenue streams that come to me. And then I like to invest in boring businesses and use other people's money to continue to grow my balance sheet.
Do you remember what it didn't have to be like the first specific one, but was there one that was like a breakout that like was a big level up and you were kind of like, oh shit, okay, now I'm like in the asset game?
Well, actually, I think the first one was a breakout for me at the time, and it was like $1,000 a month.
Mm.
So like, because I don't live lavishly. Like I think probably we could cover all of our expenses that aren't like, different properties and businesses and stuff that are extra that I now have for like 10K a month. Like I'm not like buying all of these crazy things and I buy a lot of stuff with cash. So I was like, okay, I need to cover 10K a month. And that seemed huge to me. I was like, how could I do that without working for it? And the first deal that I did basically allowed me to take a part ownership in an online services company that provided a service for individuals. This was a company that did basically like outsourced accounting.
Mm.
And I took a portion of it. I'm pretty good at sales, so I thought I could help them grow their sales business. And I wanted a portion of all the proceeds. And so that equated to about $1,000 a month for anybody that came in through me, which is kind of like a fancy way of doing an affiliate deal. And
So that was like sorry to interrupt. I want to I want to understand. I think the nuance of that structure, because it sounds like both amazing and uncommon, and like a hack for like you didn't put cash in the business. It was like, hey, I'll be a sales person for you. I'll help you grow this business, but it wasn't commission. It was like equity on the it was equity from the business. So you cash flowed on the whole business, not just like, eat what you kill style sales role.
that's right. I think this is actually one of the more underutilized tools that people say they can't do, but it's really them getting in their own way. Because a lot of these businesses, when they're really, really young, or when they really need growth but don't have time to grow it, and you have an ability to impact their bottom line while charging them $0 for
Yeah.
impacting the bottom line, business owners are, what is that called? Penny wise, pound foolish.
Mm.
So they will like take work now from somebody that they think will give them money, and they're like, oh, I'm getting it for free, and it's really not that big of a trade-off. And so you can actually do that much more frequently than you think. And so with this business, they knew how to do accounting, but they did not know how to grow the business.
Mm.
And so I was like, well, if I grow it, can I have a portion of the company? And we'll do a revenue share on that. And if I don't grow it, you'll get a bunch of work for free. I'll create all these systems and processes. I'll set up, your Facebook account, your PPC, your whatever. And, back then they didn't have PPC, but, and you can, and if I don't make anything, you keep all that stuff and I won't charge you anything.
That's really cool. How big was the business when you approached them?
So this was like a little mom and pop.
Okay.
So the business probably did. I mean, they didn't give me a view into financial, like people usually aren't going to tell you
Sure.
upfront.
Yeah. No, I was thinking like employee count. I'm trying to give
Oh,
people a sense
like
of
mom and
like,
pop, like two
yeah,
people in the business,
yeah,
and literally a husband and wife. And, maybe they had like some contractors and stuff that other people did beyond that. Um, but I don't think it has to be that. You could also do it with companies that are like for instance, we're in the media businesses. Like you could go to newsletters right now. Like I just approached a little newsletter actually today that they talk about SMB stuff, and I need a writer for one of my media companies that does that. And I basically was like, I kind of want to buy your company, but mostly I just want to buy you. So like, could I buy what you do? We could give you a portion of our, revenue if you continue to do this thing for us in whatever we drive from this business line explicitly. We'll grow the hell out of the thing for you. You do all the work on it, and we'll see what we can do. And you could do that right now with online newsletters, I think, really easily.
yeah. Do you do that a lot with people? Like I have done one or two arrangements where it's like, I'm happy to pay you as a percentage of this specific business line. But I am not happy to like take on an employee as a commitment and the paperwork and all of that stuff. I, as a business owner, like I love that. And I
Exactly.
think for the flexibility of the contributor, like they love that. Do you have a bunch of those arrangements in your
Oh, yeah.
empire?
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure. I mean, I try to get people to structure deals like that as much as possible. But usually I'm the one that will acquire with a deal like that, um, a business. But yeah, and then, in the hard asset businesses we have like laundromats and car washes and all that kind of stuff, those deals aren't as normal.
Mhm.
Um, and so we usually don't do those kind of setups. But actually, there are a few businesses where we have a guy, Mark, who's in our mastermind, and he's done like 4 acquisitions through profit share and his ability to grow them online. Because if you think about it, like how many plumbers do you know? Like, do you know any of the roofing companies in your area? There's no branding, there's no marketing, um, and so I think that's an undertapped segment that
Yeah.
I would focus on.
I worked with a lot of local home service businesses at Zarly, and I think I mean, definitely like growth is always one, but they're also constrained by capacity. Like a lot of, especially like in this macro environment, like a lot of them get more work than they need.
Yeah.
But I think like I bet you could make 10 phone calls and say like I will automate like all of your back end and billing and all of this stuff, and I will set up Zapier for you, and I will set up this, and like I don't know, a systems automation agency maybe would absolutely crush with a specific home services vertical, and you just like repeat some of the same work. And whether you take cash or future cash flows would be an amazing business. If there's any awesome automators listening to this, like holler at me, we will
Yeah,
do
please
this.
do. I would totally invest in that business and apply it to a ton of my businesses. I think that's a brilliant idea. The only thing you got to be careful of is like automate and set up, but it needs to be either you have to implant somebody in the business to like keep it up and run it because they're not
Mhm.
usually very tech savvy, or you have to make it so stupid simple for the business owners to do it.
I think the sweet spot is probably the people who have a full-time person doing it, who's like, oh my God, this is a 16-hour job where I'm always attached to my phone. And it's like, we can turn this into a 4 hour a day job with, $200 a month of SaaS tools and some setup. So
Yeah, I totally agree.
you said media companies a few times, and I want to scope that a little bit and flesh it out, because I think I don't know. I know of like your newsletter, your course, your Twitter, but you also said like 45 different media businesses or something like that. Absurd. So
45 businesses.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Only a few of them are media.
No, I hyperbolize for an attempt at comedic effect. But so media businesses in your world, some of those are products, some of those are ongoing like subscriptions. I think you've got a podcast like production agencies that fit into media businesses for you. Will you like throw us the inventory there?
Yeah. So the two that I really think of as the largest media businesses, there's one called Unconventional Acquisitions, and then I think about then it has different products and marketing lines inside of it. Products might be like a mastermind or a course, and marketing lines might be like Instagram or TikTok or whatever,
Okay.
newsletter, etc. And then Contrarian Thinking would be a separate one, and then that one has different products underneath it, like the premium newsletter and this conference that we're doing. Those are really the only two things we sell at that company. Then there's Strike Fire Production. That's a media production company that basically does podcast setups and audio. And then we have a media company that actually helps other media companies. So basically, it's sort of like a back office systems tool for people who want to build these types of businesses. And then we've had a couple other small ones. Some of them we've sold, like we had a newsletter aggregator business that we sold. And we had a cannabis media business that was like, it did DTC. It had a big like e-commerce and web presence. I think those are all of them.
Okay, this seems like a good time to ask you, which is something that I've been excited to ask you, how the hell you actually keep up with all of this stuff. This seems like a massive like amount of organization and information, and like it's one thing to list the businesses, but there's a big kind of like foggy area to me between like you, Codie, and this huge like octopus empire. What is actually like sits between you and all of these cash flows that lets you like manage them effectively relative to each other, and see the fires before they happen, and manage the people who manage the people who manage the products. Like this feels I know it came brick by brick, but like as a snapshot that seems kind of crazy. So how do you do it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very similar to how anybody runs big businesses. So I happen to have disaggregated businesses by and large, but for the most part, like, if you talk to I can't fathom if you talk to the CEO of a Fortune 100 or 500 company, like think about all the employees underneath them. I mean, in my little world, we probably have a couple thousand people that work at all of the companies, which is a lot, but it's not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands like Walmart. And the difference is in any of these businesses, it's two things. It's people first, always, and then processes. And it sounds simple, except it's absolutely not. And so the people thing is pretty important because I think at any given time, you can only really do anywhere from like 6 to maybe 8 direct reports really
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
And as you get bigger than that, it's too much input coming in. And
Hmm.
basically, I just haven't been able to do it. So, and I think that's right in human history. It's why you'll see even in like in the military, their teams, like the SEAL teams that they're on, it's like 8 people, and then you kind of scale up from there. And that's how you get middle managers in between. Actually, I think if you want to think about how to grow a business, it's really useful to look at the hierarchy of the special operations units
Hmm.
in like, let's say, the Navy, because they basically go up. They say that we can only have, what is it, like 6 to 8 personal acquaintances, which would be like the team of people that you are your direct reports, so that you manage the most closely. And then once you get up to 50 people, it starts to break again. So you need to have a set of people that manages those groups of 8 to 10 in between the 50 people. And then once you get up to 100 people, you have this sort of, that's like the biggest amount of acquaintances we can have,
Hmm.
right? Like once you get past 100 people, you kind of, everything starts to break down. And so if you look at two things, if you look at military hierarchy or terrorist cell hierarchy, actually, and see how they manage the two, it's, I think, a great way to look at how to structure your organization. So long story short, I have really good 8 people in my mix that
Hmm.
manage these underlying businesses to a varying tune. And then I don't have great, I have good, always trying to get great at processes. Things like Trainual for training all of your employees, things like communications channels that are kept across all businesses, like Slack and Trello, and an ability to be able to see financial oversight through things like Bench and Deal or aggregation across QuickBooks and the financials. So that stuff sucks to set up in the beginning, but if you do it right in the beginning, you won't hate yourself in the end.
So that's you're like logging into each of these different accounts like relatively frequently to kind of check in on stuff and monthly financials maybe for most of the big businesses.
Yeah, I would say monthly financials, quarterly financials, some of the new businesses, maybe weekly financials, sort of depends. I have something called Financial Fridays. So every Friday, I basically look through the finances of the business that's relevant. And then I have weekly team meetings with my direct reports of the largest businesses. I don't always have to have those. Most of the businesses now are at a point where those weekly meetings, I'm just at the head one, and then they bifurcate down into smaller businesses or into smaller meetings. But I think you're right. Like, not a lot of people talk about how to manage, what I would call a holding company, like
Yeah.
what Warren Buffett has. And for some reason, we think that there's this big difference between a holdco like Buffett has and a Walmart. And in reality, there's not that much difference. There's just an ability to be able to see the rhymes that happen amongst businesses, because most businesses, from a car wash business to a construction business to a podcast production business, are going to have the same problems: people and processes. 2 problems for every business.
It definitely like echoes Andrew Wilkinson too. And I feel like, there's something, it's almost a mercy that there's no cross coordination between the businesses, because then you can have one-on-one conversations with each one of those kind of business heads, and it's like they're responsible for all the cross coordination within their world, and all you have to do is make sure that nothing gets like crazy overweight and you got one person to call for each thing. um yeah, so that makes sense. Okay, so where do you you also have, and you might have included these in your direct reports from your perspective, but like I think you also have EA, chief of staff, like you've got like a Codie team. Do you think about that separately from like the business leaders or CEOs or whatever you want to call them, principals?
These days I do, because most of the businesses that I have exposure or investment in, like, I have incredible, very highly paid, competent CEOs or
Hmm.
operators. And like, they come to me for advice and stuff, but I'm not operating those businesses. There are really only 3 businesses that I operate right now. And those 3 businesses, I am in there. And then to your point, I have an EA that sort of um, crosses all the businesses. So she's like just a Codie person. And every time I've had to get a new EA, which over the past like 12 years, I think I've had 4. So I keep them for quite a while, hopefully. And a lot of times they get passed on. Like my EA that was 2 people ago. She's now the EA for my former COO, who then became the CEO of another company, right?
Cool.
So like we
Yeah,
try
yeah.
to keep people within our ecosystem, but I do think you need like a handler. I need a handler. I need a mama bear, like who
Yeah.
yells at me a lot. Um, and that's really important. But the rest of the businesses, they just go and crush it. And I think for somebody like you, or if anybody's building a personal brand with this, my process probably looks pretty similar in my sort of quote unquote, holdco, probably looks very similar to like an Andrew Wilkinson or an Anthony Pompliano, in that we all are realizing that media and audience and capital are our biggest levers that we want to handle at the top. And
Mhm.
then operations, logistics, and processes across our businesses, we want other people to handle. And so that's how I try to run it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, if the buckets of leverage, right? Like tools, product, people, capital. Product is my word for media, because I think
Yep.
it is maybe slightly confusing, but a little more all encompassing.
Yep.
And I was going for like the proper buckets. But yeah, I mean, you spend almost all your time productizing what you know and allocating capital against it and interacting with the people below you and finding the right tools to kind of make all that stuff fit. um, I left myself a cliffhanger accidentally here that I want to go back and answer. um, so you said like you had this financial independence goal of having sort of assets and investments and cash flows that would cover your 10 grand a month, and your first big win was this like sweat equity $1,000 a month. What made up that other nine? Like what was the next big win that kind of got you to that point of freedom?
Yeah, well, first I think I grew that one. So
Okay.
that went from like $1,000 to $2,000 or $3,000 to now. I mean, I still own that part of that business. I'm just not involved in it, and it's really hasn't. Everybody thinks that everything grows forever linearly. That's really not how this works. And so that I would consider, it's one of my smaller businesses. I think I probably make $5,000 to $7,000 a month or something like that from that business. And that was from years ago. But the checks still come, and it employs people and it provides a service. And so
And
that,
like before we move on, let's not you said that very casually, but like that is the fucking dream for probably 97% of people
yeah,
who have not already passed it. As soon as you pass it, your dream goes up in order of magnitude, which I'm sure we'll get to next. But like let's not blow that off because that's an incredible accomplishment.
yeah, well, thanks. Yeah. And I'm still very cheap. I mean, like we Airbnb all of like, that's a weird statement to say, but like any house that I own, like gets Airbnb. Like, most of our cars, I think I've got like an old car that doesn't, we like rent out to other people on Turo. Like I'm very aware of
I'm the same
where
way.
I started,
I
you
like I
know?
like my assets to be earners. I don't want anything just sitting around.
Yeah, I don't like liabilities.
Yeah.
And so, that sticks today. I mean, I'm sure at some point, but like I have a friend who runs a $3.5 billion hedge fund that I sit on the board of, and he still rents out his like vacation property. The guy does not need to do that. Can you imagine? He's like him and his wife like putting stuff away so that the cleaners can come in every. I'm like, Alex, you could probably stop, but he doesn't. So the point is that first business grew a couple $1,000. And then I think that, and then the next probably $3,000 to $4,000 came from direct investing. So it was, I started buying investment properties, and
Mm.
those started cash flowing. Easier back then than it is now, in my opinion, unless you're doing Airbnbs. And then I started doing deals. I think my first deal was a leverage finance deal. It was basically like a high paying debt fund that made me like 10 to 12% or something like that. And I put a decent chunk in. Um, and so it was business. I could only really focus on two things at a time. I had a pretty like serious job. Then I had this like side hustle sweat equity deal. And then I started layering assets that paid out on a monthly basis. And I think that probably got me to 8 or 9 or $10,000 before I started realizing, wait a second, I can actually buy businesses outright and put in an operator and have sort of a big windfall. And that's when things, really accelerated, let's say.
Yeah, it takes time to like make those windfalls. Like it is so there's such a weird arbitrage of like once you own that time, you're like, oh shit, well now I don't have to trade time for money for this month or this quarter, so I can put aside 6 months and go build a new asset.
Yeah.
But the amount that you can get done, like your hourly rate on those 6 months, if what you can do is buy a business with some leverage, put an operator in it, like, that's a $500,000 like earning discounted to present day if you can do that 6 months right.
Yeah,
Or build a
I
totally
agree.
new business line, like your media business or your course or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why so many people are doing courses in media business and newsletters now. And when I say so many, I mean, we have to remember that like probably anybody listening to this podcast is not like that normal for the average American, right?
Yeah, this is
Like
not a mainstream podcast. We're here to get weird.
yeah, well, and like if you're listening to this, and even if you're a course creator or whatever, there's not that many of us. It seems like there are a lot because we're on the internet and it's an echo chamber, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still a very wide open field. So, I try to get, I think that's my mission for 2022 is to make all of my businesses that are hard asset businesses also have an online earning component in some way, shape, or form, have reoccurring revenue and subscription for every single business and maybe even have media products for every single business because why not? It costs you nothing. And so, if I was listening to this and I'm like, oh my God, buying a business, that seems so overwhelming. Codie, I'm not a millionaire. Get over yourself. I would probably start by like, I think on our website, we have a list of like 150 different sites you can use to buy businesses. And there's one in particular, if you go to unconventionalacquisitions.com, and there's one that's called like Deuce, for instance. I think you know Jonas too, the guy who started it, maybe.
Maybe.
Anyway, it's a newsletter marketplace, and you can buy newsletters on there. So basically, glorified email lists for like a couple $100 to a couple $1,000, and most of them are not monetized. So you put a course, or you put affiliate links, or you put something on top of the list that already exists, and you can start cash flowing right now in whatever your expertise is. Like stop giving all the money to Harvard. Start taking some of the education dollars yourself.
Unless Goldman's paying, yeah. Then, but I really like that though, because I think an accidental theme of some of my previous conversations on this podcast have been like getting skin in the game, or actually like getting incorporated, and how much your mindset changes when you start thinking of yourself. Like as soon as you incorporate a business and you see a balance in a bank account, you're like, oh shit, it's my job to make that go up. And buying a newsletter, buying something like that is a really good way to like, if you set 500 or $1,000 on fire to learn that lesson, like that's not terrible. But the upside of that is building something that is suddenly cash flowing $1,000 a month and being responsible for something from the beginning, and getting you on that path to being Codie. Um, so when did this? I think another thing that people who kind of like have this mindset is there's usually a moment where this clicked. Like, do you have one moment where you were like, oh shit, like this worked, not and in a way that makes me feel like I can do this again and there's replicability here? Did it click to you before you did it? Did you only feel it after? Like when did you feel like this was a path and
So I'm actually very risk averse, which maybe it might not sound like that from all the things I've done, but I'm pretty much always scared and I just do things anyways. And even like to go I do Muay Thai now, and every time I go, I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna get paired up with somebody, they're gonna punch me in the neck. And then, and then I go do it. I'm like, oh, it was so great. That was so perfect. But I'm scared every single time. I go 5 times a week. It's ridiculous. But I never had a moment click. I had like the face punch. I had a moment where I was like, I hate what I'm doing. I hate what I'm doing. I hate the person that I'm doing it for. And I remember like really intensely. Like I remember, and like I don't like to do the whole, us versus them, female male thing because I think it's silly. But in this instance, this guy, said something along the lines of like, and this is why we don't hire females. And I was like, I hate you. I
yeah,
think I
fuck
hate you.
you.
Is this what it
Yep.
means to hate somebody? Yeah. And now I kind of am like thankful to them. Like, they did me a real solid there. But anyway, I was so miserable and I was making actually pretty good money at the time. And what happened instead of the moment clicking is I was like, this isn't sustainable. Like, you don't have to have the moment where you're like, it's all going to work. You can have the moment where you're like, this does not work. And
Yeah.
because this does not work, I must find something that does work. And so I think that knowledge is just as powerful. And that was mine. I was like, I hate this. I hate this guy. I don't want to do this anymore. And so I have to, as a matter of the highest priority, find another option. And so maybe you can push yourself towards that. And I think a lot of humans, we actually have a really high barometer for pain. So
Hmm.
we can like for a long time stay in a job we hate and cover it up with Netflix and not eating well and not, being healthy and not being in healthy relationships. And so we like cloud that really our barometer is almost tapped out on the cold or the heat that we can take. And so what I try to push people to do is like take some notes on that. Like write down those moments when you're really upset and something hurt, or like write down how miserable you felt that day or how tired you were at the end of the day, and use your pain actually as the fuel for you to get to the next thing. Sometimes that's easier than we doubt ourselves when we hear these like, oh, I made $1 million in 20 minutes. And
Yeah.
that doesn't make me feel like I can go do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like the pain makes you realize I don't have another choice.
Interesting. Was that what pushed you to go make the sweat equity deal? Was that the order of
Yeah.
operations? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think like, I think I'm not that smart. Like I had to have stuff like this happen to me 3 or 4 times. And the first time it happened to me, I did a startup and the startup didn't work. And then I was like, oh, I better go back to, working for the man. And then like the second time I did it, I did the sweat equity deal and that started to work a little bit. And then the third time that this happened to me, I started investing in a lot more assets and basically, got divorced, minimized the spending that I had massively so I could put all the money towards getting financial freedom. And then like the fourth time this happened to me, I was like, I'm never working for somebody else again. And I left a firm and was like, I could partner with people. I'm never going to work for somebody again. And then the fifth time it happened, it was like, not only am I never going to work for somebody again, no other partner will ever have a controlling stake instead of me again. And then, who knows what, maybe next it's like, I'll never work again, even for myself, because she's a dictator too. But like, that's the progression.
It's funny. I was actually going to ask, like, not in the context of like the independence ladder, but in the like how you are viewing your career. Like, what's the next big level up for you? Like, what are you focused on now?
I'm really struggling with that right now, to be perfectly frank. I'm struggling with, again, the teeter totter of just because you should do something doesn't mean that you want to go do it. Or just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Or just because I have this unique opportunity or moment to do it doesn't mean that I really want to. And so I think, the next rational thing for me to do is to start another fund family. I've built 3 of them. I could build one in the SMB space, but I don't know if I want to do that. And so I think like the thing that I'm learning the most about myself right now is to actually, once you hit a certain level of success, you have massive optionality. And I think in the beginning, you've got to say yes to everything. And then
Hmm.
as you progress, you have to say no to 99.9% of things. And so I'm kind of in the no phase right now. And what's next for me, I think, is sitting and sort of watching about what's happening next and doing the same thing that I tell people to do when you're first starting out, which is, what are you curious about? What are you interested in? What do you want to do no matter what? And leaning into that. And so I don't know what's next.
I mean, that's the capitalist version of the like before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Right.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think that's right.
what do you think? These are weird jobs that we have, and kind of like unconventional paths to use your brand name. But what do you think are the most critical skills to do what you do?
Um,
And
well,
I think it's you layer a lot of things like between all of your experiences and all of your insights. Like I realize it's I don't know, it's maybe a question that is begs oversimplification, but I think I think it'd be helpful um for the aspirant to
yeah.
hear.
I mean, I think, have you read that book, Who Not How?
Is
Um,
that
I don't remember who the author
Mort
is.
Mandel? Okay.
Maybe. But if you haven't read it, you should. Or the synopsis is, the question is never how to do something. The question is, who would it take to be on your team in order for you to accomplish whatever you want to accomplish?
Oh.
And so only in recent years have I realized that that's been the key to most of my success is I've gone out and I've looked for who's everywhere.
Hmm.
And I've realized that I'm pretty incapable at doing anything only by myself. And so, first of all, is that who? And as a journalist, what do you learn how to do all the time? Have conversations like this, take a bunch of notes, synthesize them, sort of catalog them, and then come back to them later. And so the who is really important. Now, I think where people go with this, so just so you don't do this, is saying like, I'm looking for a mentor. I fucking hate that. Stop looking for a mentor. Nobody wants to be a mentor. Anybody who does want to be a mentor wants to charge you money on the internet to do it. Like, stop it. It's not a thing.
Mhm.
And instead, like anybody who's been a mentor of mine, they never knew it. Like they had no idea. But I just would reach out to them on very specific things all the time. Like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a business, and here's how I'm going to monetize it. Here's like my monetization plan. It's 3 paragraphs. Would you mind reviewing it with me? Like, what am I not thinking of? And those people become your mentors. You take micro mentorship moments and you combine them into a team of mentors or a board of advisors. And so I think that's probably been the biggest
Mhm.
attribute to my success: a willingness to ask a ton of questions, a willingness to curate a bunch of humans, and then a willingness to kind of keep going even when things are painful. Uh, and I think the best way that you can do that, and I preach this a lot, it's why I do some of the hard stuff. If you can push your body physically, there's
Mhm.
really nothing that's actual pain, right? That's not philosophical pain. It is physical pain and it sucks. And if you get hit or you fall down, like it hurts. And then you realize that anything that we get philosophical pain about, like a bad email or a bad client or whatever, it doesn't hurt the same way. And so if I could do one thing, it would probably be like make everybody go and do really hard physical things.
Yeah, and if anybody here does not yet follow you on Instagram, like there is proof of hard thing on your Instagram all the fucking time. She like every week Codie's like hiked some mountain, or there's like a video of what was the oh your husband was like wrangling a bull, like it just got into a ring, like a fucking fence with a bull in like jeans and boots, and just grabbed it by the horns and let it drag him all around this is like whatever.
Mm.
Sidetrack, but like that was insane. I was like, this is 100% a death wish. But yeah, you are out there doing hard things all the time, and I think the like bravery is a muscle, confronting hard things is a muscle, and it is like as applicable to do at Muay Thai as in making a big deal and believing in yourself. And that is a I don't know, I think those are awesome skills.
Yeah,
And
don't be soft, bottom line. And you can be scared. That's totally okay. I mean,
yeah.
I think Richard Branson does it best. Like people wonder why he does all the crazy stuff that he does. I really think the reason that he does it is not he's an adrenaline junkie, but like he's had massive failure too. And the reason that you can keep going past all of that massive failure, think about how many companies that guy's had to go bankrupt and shut down and whatever. And he just keeps building because he's like, did I die? Is anybody dying? Okay, well, keep going. It's Tuesday, you know?
Yeah. And he's so good natured about it too. Makes fun of himself, like kind of laughs in the face of both danger and bankruptcy. And he's been close to both. I remember reading his books in college and they were insane. I mean, he's like in between, starting a failed Coke brand. He's like setting world record for hot air ballooning and like been doing that stuff since he was 16 years old.
Right. Yeah. I think there might be the key to something there, like civilize the mind, make savage the body, grow the balance sheet.
I don't know if you just made that up, but I would wear that T-shirt for sure to the
A new
gym.
new revenue line, swag. There we
Yes,
go.
yes. Okay, 46 businesses. Call it that. Here we go. Okay, I think I don't know. I feel both smarter and inspired by all this, and I mean, it's really cool. Like I see a lot of patterns. Like the people was a huge thing for me too. Like I was very like independent by nature and kept seeing like, well, shit, I don't know how to do that. And I kept getting stuck at I don't know how to do that instead of being like, who can I work with? And it's so fucking obvious once you once you hear it. And that's why like the leverage frameworks are so helpful for me, because I put it in front of myself and I literally look at the boxes and I'm like, I have an empty box in people or an empty box in capital, and I put a thing in there, the whole thing unlocks, and like this will all move forward again. And I feel like you have intuited that faster and better than I ever will. But and it's led to an amazing empire, and I hope things keep going incredibly well for you. And
Well,
I don't know.
thanks.
I also aspire to the leg of the stool of the boring businesses. I think that piece is really cool. And maybe we should like dig into that kind of as a final chapter here, because
Sure.
the media stuff is visible, but you also have what a laundromat, and like let's do the boring business inventory, before any final thoughts?
Yeah, so we have laundromats in boring businesses. We have property management companies.
Mhm.
We have short-term rental companies. We
That's
have
that's Airbnb, like
Airbnb, yeah, or Zillow,
properties.
or
Okay.
month-long rentals.
Okay.
We have media production companies, videography, podcast companies. We have graphic design and what would that be called? Graphic design and sort of social media and marketing
Okay.
companies.
Is
Um,
that you like Amazoning yourself of like, what are my biggest line items? I'm gonna go buy one of those fuckers.
those are
Okay.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really try to walk the talk. Like right now, one of my videographers is awesome.
Yeah.
And, but he can only do so many videos. And I'm like, bro, listen, you have a process, write down the process, hire some other people, I'll invest in your company and grow the company and I'll help you grow it. We'll tell a bunch of people about it and I'll own part of it and you pay me cash flow and I turn you into an owner. And I think that's one thing that a lot of businesses are like scared to do is they want employees. They want to own
Hmm.
you. And I've never wanted to own anybody. I mean, I want them to choose to want to spend all their time with me, and I will not stand for mediocrity or not going all in when it's appropriate. Like I can't have sort of, people halfway in and halfway out. But I don't need to own you. If you're going to provide an incredible service for me, like I'll help you grow that company. And so, yeah, I think that's a big difference for us. And that I like that. So there's like four different types of M&A, right? There's vertical, there's horizontal, there's conglomerate, and there's concentric. And so, vertical means that you're buying like a same company that does the exact same thing that you do. Like I own a grocery store, I buy my competitor grocery store. And horizontal means like you're in the same sector, but you do different things. So, that's like could be considered the Amazon model. And then conglomerate is like Berkshire Hathaway, Holdco. Like I'm just going to own a bunch of different
Hmm.
businesses. And then concentric is a similar model to that, but but they have some overlap within them. And so those are the four different like main types of M&A. And I like to do all of them.
Yeah, I was gonna say this seems like a variety. It seems like you do not have any specific dogma about it, right? It's not like you're out there doing HVAC roll-ups or anything. Like this is a wide variety. Um, you're diligent to you got service businesses in there, you've got real estate businesses in there, you've got like, is that intentional diversification? Is that just like you take what kind of comes opportunistically as long as it cash flows?
Yeah, I'm
Um,
pretty opportunistic. If I
okay.
had a fund, we'd have to have a really tight thesis on it because that's
Yeah,
what
because you
people
got to be able
want.
to tell the story.
Right.
But if it's just you,
And people want to make sure that they don't have overlap. Like, oh, I
mhm.
already own something like that. Like, I really want just this exposure, right? But when it's just me investing in things, I don't have to be that way. Now, as I get bigger, it becomes much harder to have so many companies that have no overlap whatsoever, unless those companies are also really big and they come with really top tier management. So I do think there's a toughness on scale at some point, and we've got to be more particular on them. But for right now, it's just, do they cash flow enough? Do I like the operator? Do I like the business? And is this something that I want to be invested in? And the last thing I'll say is like the boring businesses, the reason that I scream about them and write frothy tweets and get people so hyped up is not because I'm trying to show how smart I am at doing these businesses. This is a Trojan horse. And the Trojan horse for boring businesses is small businesses, they employ 47% of the US. So almost one in every two Americans works for a small business. 60% of the businesses that were shut down on Yelp during the pandemic never opened up again. The small businesses are the lifeblood of America, and they're sort of under attack. And so my philosophy is we get people interested in this segment. We get people interested in small business, so they invest, they buy businesses, they grow them, they think they're sexy, they don't only care about building the next social media company or the next tech innovation, because there's enough people pushing that thing that they start to care about their community as opposed to just their globe. And if what they say is true, which is all politics are local and everything is local, we need some focus on the community too. And I think we've gone too hyper global. So that's why I focus on small businesses. It's a Trojan horse for caring about our communities.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I mean, it's easy to underestimate how impactful those small businesses are on local communities and frankly how good of a life you can have with a well-run small business. That is people drastically underestimate the difference over the long run of somebody who owns their own, the close proximity to profits, especially own their own real estate, can write things off. Like, that it's just blue collar, but you're in the same, some of them, I guess, depending on the day to day, but like you're in the same wealth echelon as the doctors and lawyers, like quite easily. And anybody can kind of throw their hat in the ring and learn their way up and compound, and there's no upper limit on where that goes. I mean, I think you're an amazing example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. I always joke that, like, I think they posted today, like, the landscaping company that you think nothing about, all of your neighbors pay them $100 a month, to do their lawns. And like, that guy, our landscaper here, and like this house where we are right now in San Diego is not like a super nice house or anything. And the guy pulled up in a Maserati, the guy who owns the landscaping company, Luis, fucking Maserati. And,
Well, it's a
and he
write-off,
knows why.
that's a business
Yeah,
expense. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, so and I was in Dallas yesterday, and one of my favorite games, like if I could have a superpower, it'd be the most ridiculous superpower. It would be that as I walked past anybody or like drove past any house, that I could have like an info bubble. And the info bubble would be like, who lives there? What did they do? How did they make their money? Like, what's the story? And I would just like, that would be the coolest superpower to me. And so I'm in Dallas last week, and we're driving by a bunch of houses, and Dallas has an amazing concentration of wealth. And we go to this giant monstrosity of a house for one of my girlfriends.
And they love their houses too. They put that money in that house.
Oh my God. So we walk up to this thing, and she's like living one door down from Jordan Spieth, that golfer. And so we pull up. I'm like, geez, I'm like, what does her husband do? Because she doesn't work. And she's like, oh, he's a dentist. I'm like, get out of here. A dentist did not buy this house. She's like, well, actually what he did is he started this small dental practice. The dental practice is for actually like underprivileged communities. So they take Medicare or Medicaid. I can never remember which is whichever one's not for when you're retirees.
Terrible brand. No idea. Continue.
Okay. Yeah, anyway, so they take government payments basically. And but the cool thing is, so what they do is the whole thing is like a Disneyland ride. So it's basically like hyper efficiently run, where the kids go from like one station to another and another, and it's cool, and they tell a story, and it's decorated cool, but they get people in and out like this. And then they have a system where everybody knows the kid's name, and so it feels hyper personalized, but in fact it's just way more efficient than a doctor's office. So like you always show up on time to your appointment, or you don't make it, like there's a charge if you don't. And so they are like, it's run like a machine. And they open up the dental practice on the weekends for free for birthday parties for people in the community, and in the evenings for birthday parties in the community. So they like hyper serve this market. People get obsessed with it. The guy grew the company to like a bunch of locations, sold it to PE. Now he lives in this giant monstrosity. And so those stories are everywhere. And, I think more people need to realize that.
That's amazing. I love hearing stories of those kind of businesses that I've never heard before, and I've certainly never heard that before. Not a lot of innovation in dentistry, but I like that one. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a good spot to leave it for chapter 1, and I'm excited to check in on the Codie empire in the coming months and years. And
right back at you. You got to now. Homework for you is. What are going to be your next revenue streams, and how are you going to create your decentralized empire? You'll have to report back to me on that. I expect 2 revenue streams at least in the next 90 days.
Yes, ma'am. I'll do it. I started a like spreadsheet with like a jank together dashboard of cash flows. And I'm like, I felt like you would be proud of me for doing that one, because I know that like that's where you focus, and that's not what like any of the dashboards look like. And so I get great joy of like focusing on cash flows, not net assets. But I thought if anybody in the world had like an amazing way to visualize all these things and like see them come together, it might be you. And like was so curious how you ran that. So I will report back with more cash flows.
Totally.
And
Do it. And I mean, we built like some software that does it inside of the companies. It's really not that great though. Because with software you have to like keep updating it, and you have to have the top talent. I'm not that great at hiring tech talent yet. So we need some better systems, and we probably just have to find something that's out of the box that they can keep iterating on.
I got a placeholder for building that, actually. Like that building software is like a little more in my wheelhouse. Not that I'm technical, but I at least know how to like scope projects and work with
I love
designers
it.
and
We
devs. And
should
I
have a
thought,
brainstorm actually where we think about all. So one of the revenue streams I do not have in none of the businesses that I own are SaaS, not one.
oh my God,
And that's,
SaaS is like the hottest one there is.
I
You
know,
could
I'm
sell
a
those things for
boring
like
business chick.
1,000 multiples. Yeah.
So, and I don't even want to exit. I just want the reoccurring cash flow and to
Yep.
have that as a part of the offering. So we should have one of these where we just brainstorm what are all the SaaS tools that we should
I got the
build.
placeholder and I got the name ready for you. We're gonna call it the cash board, and we're gonna pipe in Stripe. We're gonna pipe in like data from wherever you got cash flows. You might have to enter the analog ones yourself, but
Yeah,
we'll pile it up, and then we can just like behold our beautiful cash flow dash flow board.
I love it. Okay, I am going to follow up with you on this because I have some other ideas I want to run by you, and I would love to fund a couple of these businesses just for us to use, and if we make money on it, that'd be rad.
Yeah, there's enough people in our little like Twitter nerd WhatsApp. I think that like we got our first customers already.
That's so true.
So follow you on Twitter for sure. Follow you on Instagram for your daily workout inspo. Definitely get on the Codie's newsletter. Do you have a separate newsletter for unconventional acquisitions, or contrarian thinking is the
That's
main one?
another thing we need. We have a newsletter for unconventional acquisitions, but
Okay.
it hasn't been a huge focus. Contrarian thinking is really the main point, but we
Okay.
probably need to hire somebody to level up that newsletter too.
I mean, you 100% want to subscribe to the newsletter that is written by a journalist background with an MBA and her own cash flows and worked in the finance industry. It's a really unique. It is full of stories like this one you told me today. So I love reading it. I think anybody listening will enjoy it for sure. Did I miss anything in that final rundown?
No, you nailed it. Yeah, I think best
Yes.
spots are Twitter and contrarian thinking. So let's do it.
Cool. Yeah. That homework is not just for me, by the way. If anybody creates a new cash flow as a result of this podcast, tweet at me and Codie, and we will respond with
Yeah,
congratulatory,
very exciting.
celebratory gifts and be delighted to do it.
Yeah, I love it.
All right. Codie, thank you so much for making the time. This was even more delightful than I knew it was going to be. And I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So thank you for coming. And I look forward to the next one.
Me too. Thanks for having me.